Okay, the lights have just come up over Stonewood Junction on the Central Indiana Railroad in the summer of 1919. Now that the sun is up, the quarry workers have shown up in the limestone quarry. Indiana, of course, is known for much of the limestone that was used in building the wonderful buildings in Washington, D.C. Okay, the morning crew is bringing the shay up to the lower yard at Stonewood Junction, and it's going to pass one of two main streets in the little village of Stonewood Junction. Most of the structures on the railroad are scratch-built. This is one of them. The cedar shingles that you see are actually real cedar. They're made out of cedar cigar wrappers that have been flattened with a steam arm. The trees, some of which have ground foam as foliage, others have a little finer natural material as foliage. Most of the armatures of the trees on the railroad have been made out of unstranded wire, although there are some commercial armatures as well. Torpor and lassitude is one of two main industries in Stonewood Junction. The Torpor and Lassitude Company was formed in order to build a particular kind of easy chair. The building is scratch-built. The roof is simulated copper. Now we move into some of the little stores on the main drag. The log building to the top there is the original building in the little village, and it was the original person's house. You'll notice that we still haven't gotten to too much indoor plumbing. There's an outhouse next to it. But then as the village prospered, he began to use the log cabin as his barn, and he moved down to the shack in front. This row of small stores are among the few that are not scratch-built. The brown building in the middle is scratch-built. The others are all kit-built and kit-bashed. The one on the left is my favorite. It's the doctor's office. It was named after my cousin, Dr. Jug Sawyer, who was the doctor in Saluda, South Carolina for a lot of years. I think he delivered something like 3,600 babies in his career in that little town. And I was privileged to go to his funeral. And we took a picture of this and sent it to the current doctor in the town, who is Jug's son, Dr. Bill Sawyer, and that picture is hanging in the doctor's office. This is the rest of the town. Obviously, before it became a town, after the original settler came in and built his log cabin, there was a farm there, and you can see that just to right center. Then the town began to grow, and they built a church. One of my favorite is the Italianate mansion in the background. It's also kit-bashed. Instead of being built as a real thing, actually it's a cardboard cutout from one of those Dover magazines that you buy in museums. It shows that if you take a cardboard cutout and add real windowsills and real cornices and so forth to three-dimensionalize it, you can make something look pretty darn real, even if it is just a flat cardboard structure. The tree in the just to the right of center in the background there is one of my favorite trees, and again, it's made out of unstranded wire. I think many people have seen these little unstranded wire trees in jewelry shops where they take semi-precious stones and wrap a branch around them. Well, I use the same technique. This one has a tree house, and in keeping with the fact that I like to put a lot of detail in my buildings, this tree house has the young man sitting at the edge of it. commiserating with his dog down at the foot of the tree just to the right, who can't climb up the ladder. Poor thing. The Octagon House is actually scratch built, but I copied the plans from another one of those Dover Victorian flat cardboard book covers, and I just wanted to build it in real wood instead of like the Italianate house we talked about earlier. The roof of both the house and the stable next to it are 4/0 sandpaper cut with a pinking shears, and I'm kind of proud of the posts on the front porch of the Octagon House. Each one of those contains 26 pieces of wood. I'm also pleased with the flowers. When I first got into this hobby, we did not have anything but lichen and furnace filters to use as scenery, but now we have a lot of materials that we can buy from manufacturers that specialize in scenery products for architectural modelers and for model railroaders. On the right-hand side in the foreground, you'll see a 1903 Oldsmobile. That belongs to the lady who has climbed up the hill behind the farm truck and is dickering with the guys just underneath that tree that are running an open-air market. In keeping with the 1918 theme, this quarry predates the mechanized quarries that we see nowadays. This was back in the days when they used wedges and hammers, and wedged and hammered and wedged and hammered until the pieces fell off. This one has its own little derrick there, powered by a little steam engine, so that it can take the pieces and load them over toward us when the flat cars show up to take the rough cut pieces off to the planing mill in the city. The morning crew is still bringing the shay up. Now it's abreast of the lower Stonewood Junction yard. And that takes us up past the little shack that's up at the top of the Stonewood Junction yard. Back in 1918, they hadn't heard of health laws, and that's why you see that the outhouse is up higher than the water well. We haven't talked about the logged out areas, and of course we need them in order to feed the lumber mill. And when I get to the city, there will also be a lumber company. The little stumps, the vertical stumps, are mostly chopsticks cut with a side cutter. Some of the dead trees are made out of unstranded picture framing wire. It's very fine, and some of the second growth small trees you see there are also made out of the picture hanging wire. Their scale is about right for this. The whole layout, incidentally, is HO scale, 3.5 millimeters to the foot, just a little over 1/8 of an inch to the foot. Now the climax is heading up the hill, going to the upper Stonewood Junction. Stonewood Junction is a contraction of stone and wood. And up there is the sawmill, which is the wood part of Stonewood Junction. You'll notice there is an original old mill, and then as it became more successful, they built a newer planing mill to the left of it. The people that work in the lumber mill live in those little shotgun houses up on the hill. And of course you can't make a full living just working in the lumber mill. So some of them have a little cattle, little sheep. Indiana was and is a very diversified state. It had lumber, furniture. It was the auto capital of the world at one time. Had coal, oil, as we'll get to a little later. Originally, the coal mines back in the hills of Indiana and Kentucky and other places were little family affairs. And here is a little family-operated coal mine. And you'll notice that the white Indiana limestone has turned a little darker into more like a coal shale as we move around the layout and get into the coal country. Those castings of the cliffs and the shale are taken from actual pieces of coal. Unfortunately, the coal that I had was from West Virginia, not from Indiana. But then as the coal mining industry prospered, they began to consolidate and build larger coal mines. And this one, you'll notice on the left, there is a coal slide which has collapsed and is weed grown. But there was still coal in that particular vein, and so they began to decide that not only are we going to pick it up by road, but we'll also pick it up by rail. So they added a way to take the coal out of the mine and put it either to a truck underneath the first building or to in a hopper car on the railroad on the part of the building that's to the right. Some people have asked me how I put so much foliage and so forth right next to the track. What do you do about track maintenance? Well, what I do about it is I make the foliage removable. So if I have any problems with the track, I just pull the trees and lay them aside, and then when I'm finished with my maintenance, if I'm lucky, I get the tree replanted. As I said before, Indiana had oil as well, and I've taken a lot of pride in modeling what they call an oil power. I'll explain a little bit. On the right you see what we all think of as the original oil wells, and they work fine except that each one required a crew and its own engine to work the pump. Then after some of the oil had been depleted and the fields got a little bit less efficient, they realized that they couldn't afford to keep that much labor with less oil coming out. So someone came up with the idea of building a machine that would pump more than one oil well at a time. So in building this machine that would pump more than one well at a time, I don't know why they called them a power. That was the name. It was called a power. Anyway, they set up one engine and it would work a horizontal eccentric wheel, and they attached a bunch of rods to those wheels. You can see the horizontal slot coming out of that kind of reddish building there in the left background, and you can see the rods going off. There is a jack pump just to the left of the original pump, and it is going up and down because the eccentric inside the building is pushing and pulling on that rod. The one you can see on the far left is doing the same thing, and that was known as an oil power. The tanks on the left are the original wooden tanks that came out of the oil wells, and as their business prospered, they were able to put in a newer metal tank. That one is riveted, incidentally, not welded. And there's the office in the foreground. There's a delivery truck that they're going to put oil cans in. And then the little yellow car in the background is the Stutz Bearcat, owned by the fellow that actually owns this oil well, so he's not a coupon clipper. He actually goes up and checks to see his oil. Another little feature is there is a bridge of the road leading down to the right, and notice the bridge is an old, dilapidated flat car left over from the railroad. As is typical of a lot of the United States, including southern Indiana, always having trouble with the revenuers, so we had our still too. Also, back in those days, we had hobos. I guess nowadays we call hobos homeless people and they don't travel as much. But there is our little hobo thing, and I'm pretty pleased with the way my fire worked out. I'm indebted to Joel Goldberg, who gave me the flickering diode to use as my fire. And the sound chip, of course, is a commercial one, like the other sound chips that we've heard so far. Here are the outskirts of what is going to be my city. I've worked from the village all the way around the layout to the city, and the city is the last thing to be built. And these buildings constitute the edge of town. There's a blacksmith shop in your foreground. You may wonder why that pickup truck is out of position. It's because he had a really bad Saturday night, and he's still having a bad Saturday night on Monday morning, and when he made his turn into the parking lot, he knocked over the porch's support structure, and they're all standing around there commiserating with the owner. I've talked a great deal about Indiana because this layout is laid in central Indiana, but there's some Michigan connections too. A few years ago in one of the model magazines, a fellow wrote an article about how to use a photograph to bring a road into the backdrop, and that's what I've done in this case. And the Michigan connection is the photograph is a 4x6 borderless satin print of Echo Road, which is a beautiful little road near where I live. It was glued to the backdrop, and I just dabbed some of the backdrop colors from the leaves and so forth around it to ease the edges, and then planted trees around it, and I think it blends in pretty nicely. It's about 3.5 feet from the lens as you're looking at it now. I'll say one more word about the trees. There are a lot of ways to do trees, and one of the favorite ways is what I call the powder puff method. And there are some people that are really good at the powder puff method. I just don't happen to cotton to it. I like to take the extra trouble to build each individual tree. The other Michigan connection is this layout has a lot of older carriages and old Model T Fords and so forth, and those are all from complicated kits that are built out in one of the suburbs on the west reaches of Detroit. Jordan Products. They're really good kits. They're difficult, but they're really good kits, and they make nice vehicles. We've talked mostly about the scenery and the buildings and so forth on this railroad. There are some railroad things too, like these two cars. I started off really as a model railroader, and then the more I got into it, the more I realized that I was a model builder, and that the railroad is the thing that holds all the models together. But we'll put this shot in just so you'll know that I do know how to build some cars. The basic form of the layout is a folded dog bone. Think of a dog bone with the bump at either end, only if you fold one around on itself, that's what we have here. The overall dimensions, the wall dimensions anyway, are 12 feet by 24 feet. So I suppose that means the mainline run is 80, 90 feet. What you see here is about 7 or 8 years old. That's as long as I've been in this house. I've been modeling since I was about 12 years old, so there's a few things you see that are 60 and maybe even 70 years old. They've been used in previous layouts and reused in this one. But most of what we see here is pretty new stuff. It's not finished, of course. Actually, I don't want it to be finished. But I do have escape plans if I ever do get this much finished. There's another way that I can go down one of my walls to extend the layout.